Abbot, Bronstein, and Marie Rudden are going to describe our paper, Transference Relationship and the Analyst as Object, Findings from the North American Comparative Clinical Methods Group.
So I thought I'd start off by just talking about the Ccm Project a little bit. And this was started by David Tuckett through the European Federation of Psychoanalysts about 10, 12 years ago, and then brought in conjunction with David to North America by me. The Comparative Clinical Methods Project is now chaired by Marie, and we co-authored this paper, and it's an attempt to explore how psychoanalysts actually work in the consulting room with their practices, and we particularly are focused on how North American analysts work across the various theories, across the various schools of thought. Now, to that end, we also have a working party, which is 8 other psychoanalysts, and they also represent different schools of thought from the United States and Canada. We have at this point looked at approximately 30 cases, and we have something called a 2-step model, which will be detailed further in the paper. In it, we basically have 10 or 15 analysts who meet over 2 days, usually at the international congresses, but also at other meetings, to study 2 or 3, at the most 4 clinical hours of one of the members of the clinical group. The process involves examining what and how analysts make interventions, what kind of interventions they make, and how that reflects both their implicit and explicit theories as psychoanalysts in the consulting room. The first task we do is to examine what analysts say and do and classify the different interpretations. The second is to try to understand what this analyst's view is of how psychoanalysis works in their mind. What is their theory, for instance, of transference, of the unconscious, of therapeutic action, and things like that. To this end, we have these cases that we have been studying, and we have tried to represent all the different groups, the so-called clinical theories in North America. So we've had ego psychologists and relational psychoanalysts, American Kleinian psychoanalysts, and self-psychology analysts, as well as representatives of both the French and the English-speaking groups in Canada. So with that, let me turn it over to Marie.
Okay, we decided to do this paper based on 2 presentations that we joined together. Abbot had given a talk at the IPA Congress in Mexico City about the analyst as object for the patient. And I had given a talk in New York about how analysts think about transference and about the therapeutic or real relationship. These kind of fit naturally together, and so we joined the talks into this one paper, which represents a particular kind of qualitative research. Our aim was to see how analysts in North America actually practice along these specific lines. Our findings were that of the 17 North American analysts included in this study, we found that they fell pretty naturally into 3 categories. The first category, which included 8 analysts, were those who pretty consistently and primarily work at exploring and interpreting the transference. They didn't seem to have any particular idea of how they were using or attending to the real relationship or the therapeutic relationship. And they also didn't have a particular way of thinking about what kind of object they were for their patients. The second group of analysts, which were 4 of the 17, were those who basically saw themselves as a particular kind of object for the patient, and in fact they managed the analysis so that they were that type of patient, that type of analyst. And so, for example, they would try to be a better than mother. And they tended to interpret not so much in the transference, but about the patient's past as if, as it related to an experience with a traumatic relationship. The third group used a mixed model in which they would actively explore and interpret the transference, But they also, at the same time, would often actively comment on the therapeutic relationship or the nature of the two of them working together. And sometimes this was extremely clear and effective, and at other times it was a little bit hard for the patient, I think, to follow what was transference and what was relationship interpretation.
And I think the last thing we'll say is what we think and believe the real value of this is that it is a descriptive piece of research, psychoanalytic research, which really attempts to understand how analysts actually do work in their consulting room in some step towards understanding both the overlap in our clinical theories as well as the real differences in technique and possibly outcome.
And finally, we did find that while people have an overarching theoretical background, we did find that there were very interesting individual differences among analysts, even in the same theoretical background.
We hope you enjoy the paper.
Yes.